is done that we say together, and so it is. All righty, everyone. Well, thank you for being with us. And if you get the title, I didn't realize kind of the subtlety of what we were talking about until this morning, because usually what happens is that the topic comes to me on Saturday night and then the talk comes to me on Sunday morning. But it's letting go of resistance, releasing resistance. And the subtlety there is, it is not beating down resistance, it is not overcoming resistance, it is not subduing resistance, because you can't resist resistance, or you'll still be resisting. It's a totally different view, a totally different way of thinking, a totally different way of looking. There's an old saying that says, when the only tool that you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Right? So we tend to look at things based on our experience, and we try to shape them and mold them and judge them and analyze them and make them fit into something that we already know. And then we can kind of deal with them, if we want to think of it that way. Okay. And if we look at the scripture says you cannot put new wine into old skins. There's a time when you can't fix the house anymore. You have to scrape clean down to the foundation and start all over again. And what those passages mean to me is that sometimes there's a new way of thinking and a new way of looking and a new way of being, and it just doesn't fit the old mold. We can't take something that is so different and so new and make it fit the old ways of thinking. You can't put new wine into old skins, they'll burst. They'll burst. But you see, this is what we try to do. This is what in the human experience we try to do. We see something new and we try to relate it to something we already know. That's just the way we are. We look at that and say, oh, that's like this. And many times, when we make that association, it's not really true. It's not really accurate. It is for us. We believe it. It's in our head. But it's not necessarily so. And we don't typically, as human beings, we don't typically ask ourselves what evidence there might be that we're wrong. That's one of the easiest ways to teach critical thinking is just ask people, your employees or your students, when they come to you and they're sure they're right, ask them, what evidence did you consider that you might be wrong? What have you looked at? When did you go outside the box? Because we tend to form that opinion, and we tend to assume that opinion is right because it's ours. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. It seems to fit again. I learned how to fly sailplanes, and when you come in for a landing in a sailplane, you get one time. You don't have an engine. You can't push the throttle in and go around and make another approach. Every time you come and make a landing approach, you better get it right. So in flying a plane, when you're coming in for a landing, you always want to land into the wind, because the plane is designed, the controls work facing into the wind. If you're facing downwind, everything works backwards and it gets real confusing really quickly. So you fly a downwind leg, you come into the field, and you usually come into what's called an initial point, which is somewhere near the windsock. You look down at the windsock and you see which way is the wind blowing, and that's the way you're going to land into the wind. So then you turn and you fly downwind leg, and when you get to where you think you are far enough away from the field and close enough away from the field, you're looking kind of back over your shoulder, well then you turn and you fly what's called a crosswind leg or base leg. And then when you get where you think you're going to line up with the runway, you turn onto final approach, which has you heading straight for the runway. Well, now, as I say, with a glider, you only get one shot to do that. So you're constantly looking and evaluating your position and your altitude. Is the air you're flying through going up, or is it going down? If it's going up, I might have to fly a little bit further away from the field before I turn. If I'm going down, I may need to turn in a little bit closer. Is the wind speed holding Or is it increasing? Is it decreasing? All these things you have to learn how to judge. So when the flight instructor's with you, they sit in the back seat behind you, and when the flight instructor's with you, and they tell you, go ahead and set up your pattern, go fly your pattern, and you fly, and you turn, and you get on final approach, and you're coming in, and the flight instructor says, now, did you turn in at the right place? Are you satisfied with this approach? Do you think you're on the right glide angle to touch down at your desired spot? And you say, sure. And he says, that's not the answer I want to hear. I know you think it is. You're the one that turned the airplane. You're the one flying the plane. Of course you think it's right. You wouldn't have turned if it was right. But how do you know? How do you know if you're on the right approach? See? And then we were taught to ask and answer questions that would force us to know if we were truly on the right slope, or if we were in some kind of trouble, And it was simple, it was simple enough to do, but you had to force yourself to do it. So you look down through your windshield, you look down at the spot on the runway where you want to touch down, and you just look at it. And, is that spot moving down on the windshield? Well, if it is, then you're going to fly over it. You're coming in too high, and you need to make a steeper approach. You need to do something to get the plane to come down steeper. If you're looking at it and it's moving up on the windshield, well, you're coming in too low, and you're not going to make it. And then the question is, are you going to make the runway at all? So now you got to do something to shallow your approach. But my point is we as human beings are so attuned. We identify so strongly with the ideas that come to us and pass through our field of consciousness that we think they must be true. We think they must be true. And they're not always true. They're not always true. So part of maturing spiritually, part of growing spiritually, is this ability to let go of our opinions, to let go of our judgments, to let go. I think the greatest day in my spiritual life was the day when I came to the realization that everything I ever knew might be wrong. It might be, Now I got to start all over again. What do I believe? Why do I believe it? If I believe something is true, how do I know that it's true? What evidence might there be that I'm wrong? What other ways are there to view this particular thing? And what this whole process, I call it a process of maturity. It's kind of a mature consciousness that's able to be, in leadership development, they call it to be self-aware without being self-conscious. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you're self-conscious, you're aware of something, but you're kind of embarrassed by it, You're self-conscious. You go to the business meeting and you're dressed in casual dress, and you find out that everybody else is wearing black tie. You're self-conscious. You're not dressed for this thing. And you know that everybody's going to be looking at you and saying, well, didn't he or she get the memo? Don't they know that this is black tie? Self-aware just means we're aware of something without labeling it right or wrong, without judging it right or wrong, without feeling ashamed about it, and just being aware of it. Just saying, oh, look at that. Now, it may be something, we may become aware of something about ourselves that we want to change. And that's great, right? That's wonderful. We could say, oh, I really don't like that about myself. I think I'll do something to change that. But if we overly identify with it, what happens is we start to try to hide it. Right? We're curious people as human beings. We hide stuff from ourselves. And where do we hide it except within ourselves? And you say, how in the world can I hide something from myself when it's within myself? But we do that. We overlook things. We ignore things. This is another line in Scripture. It says, don't worry about the splinter in your brother's eye. Worry about the plank that's in your own. It's easy for us to look out there and say, what's wrong with all those people out there? I'll tell you what's wrong with all those people out there. And if you don't know what's wrong, just go on the internet and read a little bit. There's somebody there telling everybody what's wrong with them. You know what's wrong with you. This is all judgment. This is all resistance, you see. This is all struggle. As I said, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. And it seems that our consciousness, as we moved through evolution, it seems that our consciousness was geared to problem solving, geared to looking at something, geared to assessing it, whether it was a friend or a foe, whether it was a threat or not, and then what can I do with this? How am I going to do this? Right? In the book of Genesis, it says that God gave Adam and Eve dominion over all the other creatures. And we think that means we can use them any way that we want to use them. We can control them. They're ours. You know? I'm not certain that it meant that. I'm not certain that it meant that at all. But that seems to be what has made the human race, as we have it, as successful as it is, if you want to call it that, at least in the ability to survive. We have intellect, we have reason, we have logic, and we can think through things, and we can solve problems that other creatures can't solve. You know, we are not as strong as the strongest animal. We are not as fast as the fastest animal. We can't swim as well as the dolphins and the whales, you know. But we can think. We can think. We can build ships. We can capture the wind. We can build engines. We can turn propellers. We can build airplanes. So we have through the course of evolution, we as human beings, we have learned to use this ability to think to help us to exist and to survive. And as I mentioned last week, we don't even know who we really are. We think that we are these thoughts. We overly identify with these thoughts. And part of what these thoughts are, and part of what these thoughts do, is they label and they judge. They label and they judge. And and then we resist. You see, the hammer that we have, the tool that we have, that we rely on a great deal. Not everybody, not all the time, but the human race, what we rely on a great deal is the ability to struggle, the ability to subdue, the ability to control. We start to think of things and say, how are we going to manage that? You know, if there's value in it or if there's threat in it, we start to say, how am I going to control that? I told you we used to have a basset hound years ago, and I call it the pet rock that eats. It just lay there and it eat until we get the vacuum cleaner out. And the vacuum cleaner had a carpet attachment on the front. You know, it was a little square thing, went on the end of the hose, and it had a beater in it. You know, it had a beater brush that would just kind of stir up the dirt in the carpet. And it had a headlight on it. And its headlight would shine out on the carpet so you could see what was in front of you. And as you roll this thing back and forth, you could see, you know, if you were getting the dirt out of the carpet. Well, I don't know why, but one of the basset hounds had decided that that was a threat. Now, this dog would just lay there all day, would just lay there, not do anything until it was hungry, and then it would bark. But boy, oh boy, you get that vacuum cleaner out, and it was up on all fours. And it would stand there, and it would just face that headlight on the carpet attachment. And it would bark, row, 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 like that. So I'd push that thing towards the dog, and the dog would bark and back up away from it, and I'd pull the carpet attachment back towards me, and the dog would come forward, and it would always maintain just about 12 inches, just a safe distance between it and this carpet attachment. Now, I know the dog had no idea what that carpet attachment was or what that carpet attachment was for, but he was going to show it who was boss. Right? He didn't know what it was, but he was going to control it by barking at it, by standing in front of it. It's kind of like if you've ever seen the videos of the mountain gorillas in Africa with a big thunderclap, and they hear the big thunderclap, and they stand up and they beat their chest and they roar back at the clouds. They don't know what that thunder was, but by God, they're going to show it who's boss. So we tend to have this outlook, this worldview, where we kind of look at things and we immediately start to analyze them, start to think about them, start to label them, start to judge them. And then we try to control them. We try to figure out, well, how can do I need to do anything with this? Is it a threat I need to do something with now? Is it an opportunity I need to do something with now? How do I manage this? And we get caught up in that, and that becomes our whole experience. And we think that's who we are. We think that we are the one thinking all of these thoughts. We think that we are the one analyzing all of these things. So what we've been talking about for the last few weeks is we want to consider what Emmett Fox told us, which is our spiritual growth is more about minusing than it is about plussing. And what he means by that, or what I think he means by that, is we don't have to add anything to ourselves to be more spiritual than we already are. We're never going to be more spiritual than we already are. When we die, nothing's going to tap us on the shoulder and say, woof, now you're a spiritual being. You see? Because we already are spiritual beings. But we don't recognize that we are spiritual beings as much as we could, because we are so caught up and identified with the activity of these thoughts that pass through our field of awareness. We think we are the thinker, and we become stuck in those thoughts. And as I mentioned last week, it's like the blades on a fan spinning very quickly. You can kind of see through them, but if you try to stick something through them, you'll hear the rattle as it strikes the fan blades. And what we want to do is to dissolve our attachment to those thoughts. We don't need to add anything to ourselves. We just need to realize that the activity of our thoughts are not who we are. In fact, they may not even be our thoughts. We call them our thoughts. But maybe they're just thoughts that we have become aware of, right? Now, one of the problems that we have with this is just my view of the world. So I just want you to take this as being my explanation, and you may want to find a different explanation or make your own explanation. But the property of the intellect, and by the intellect I mean thinking and thoughts, and perhaps what we would call, at the human level, what we would call mind, not at the spiritual level, what we call mind with a capital M, but at the human level, the activity of mind. The intellect is constantly analyzing things. It is constantly labeling things. It is constantly judging things. It is constantly separating things into knowns and unknowns. And once we think we have a label for it, we pigeonhole it and we think, got that one. Free ourselves up to go look at something else, right? And again, you can see how this would be very important to survival through evolution. So the intellect has all of these opinions about what things are and the way things should be and the way things ought to be, And if you go from culture to culture around the planet, you will find different opinions. You will find what's considered to be good in one culture might be considered to be bad in another. Right? The animals that we eat here are considered sacred animals in other parts of the world. The animals that we treat as our loving pets here are considered food in other parts of the world. So what makes it okay, in one place and not okay in another place, other than this activity of thought? Right? Not, as Shakespeare said, nothing is right or wrong, but thinking makes it so. And this just helps us to dissolve our attachment to our opinions, because the intellect goes around and it starts labeling all these things and analyzing all these things and judging all these things, and it creates the ego. The ego, which, as I'm defining it today, you're going to find Jung and Freud might have different definitions, but as I'm defining it today, it is a collection of ideas about who we are, about what we are, about the way we should be and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. The ego is just a bunch of opinions. You're not what you think you are. You're not. Absolutely not. You're so much more. So our journey of spiritual growth, in Zen they call it the journey to the true self. The journey to the true self. And as we discussed over the last couple of weeks, it's not a physical journey. Right? It's not the hero's journey of going on a quest through Camelot. But it is a journey of releasing, of letting go, of all of these opinions that we have that are just simply not true. Simply not true. They may have served us at one time. They may have served humanity at one time. But we are not that. We are not those opinions. We are not this ego identity. And of course we have to say, well, if we're not that, then what are we? And that then is the journey to the true self. So resistance then. We start to think of different spiritual teachings throughout the ages have talked to us about the dissolution of our ego, dissolving our ego. And that terrifies us. That terrifies the ego. The ego thinks it is. The ego thinks that's what we are. And now we're talking about dissolving it, and it thinks, oh my goodness, I'll be annihilated. I won't be anymore. Can't have that. We've got to resist that. We've got to struggle against that. We've got to fight against that, you see, because it doesn't want to die. Right? What is the greatest fear our society has? It is the fear of death. We think we will be annihilated. We think we will be no more. And we worry about that. And the funny part is if we are no more, there'll be nothing to worry. You know? The Dalai Lama, I love what he says about that. He says, either there'll be absolutely nothing to worry, you will not be anymore. So there's nothing there to worry. So you can't worry if you're not there. So why worry now? Or you will continue on. Consciousness will continue on. And if consciousness continues on, then the most important thing to do here while we are alive is to discover what this thing called consciousness is, and to identify with consciousness, not with the activity of thought, not with the ego identity. So we tend to label things as good or evil or right or wrong, and then we struggle against them. Our whole society seems to be addicted to the drama of the struggle. Look at the reality TV shows that they have, with people who are going to lose weight. They turn it into a competition. They turn it into a struggle. There's people yelling at people all the time, And it just seems that in our society there are approaches that it has to be a struggle. If it's not a struggle, it's not valuable. That's the way that we seem to think, right? No pain, no gain. It has to be a struggle. So we make everything a struggle. What's the most valuable thing in our lives? It's our spiritual growth. So we tend to turn that into a struggle. We have to make it hard. We have to work hard at it. We have to struggle at it. We have to do all of these different things to be holy and all of that. And it's none of that. We have to discover the true self, not the ego self, not the thinker, but the witness, the observer. So if we go back to the story of the Garden of Eden, and I'm going to give you a kind of a broad brush view, a different view perhaps. If you go back to the story of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were kind of in a close relationship with God. They walked with God in the cool of the evening. They spoke to God like a friend, you know. They were very close to God. And then something happened, and they had to leave the garden. And what happened was they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil. Thinking, identifying with their thoughts, thinking, got them put out of the garden. Think of a small child when a baby comes into the world. You know, it doesn't know right from wrong. That's something that it has to learn. That's something that it has to be taught. Doesn't know who it is. Doesn't know that it's not just part of everything. And little by little, we indoctrinate that child into our world. This is good, that is bad. You know, you must do this, you must not do that. And life starts to become a struggle. It happens to all of us, you see. This idea of what is right and what is wrong, this knowledge of what is right and what is wrong, that keeps us from the garden, that keeps us out of the garden. So this idea of resistance, letting go of resistance, here's why this is so important. Many traditional religions, many of the cultures that we grew up in, taught us to resist, taught us to struggle, taught us to fight. We are separated from our God. We are separated from ourselves. We are separated from our bodies. Our bodies are bad, and they will lead us astray, and we must resist them, and we must fight. And our whole life then becomes this struggle. And we're never really growing because we are just stuck in the struggle. You see, what we resist persists. I'll go back to the story of we talked about the knights on the quest for the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail is the journey for the true self, right? The Christ within, the presence of the divine within. That point where the divine has become human as us. That's what we are trying to get back to. That's what was in the garden. But our thoughts, the activity of our thoughts, the over-identification with our thoughts, and the things that we resist, which keeps us struggling, you see, keeps us from experiencing that. So you can imagine the knight is on the quest, and the knight goes through this quest and is on the quest to find the Holy Grail. And he comes to some sort of a challenge, right? There's always a challenge and challenges along the way that must be overcome. And what if the knight just stayed there forever, engaged in that battle? Just stayed in that spot, finding things to fight, picking arguments, you know. It would never proceed on its journey. It would be stuck. So when we are resisting, when we are caught up into this worldview of struggle and of resistance, see, we are stuck. We are stuck. And the ego since it knows that dissolution of the ego, but it doesn't know what that means, doesn't truly understand it, the ego does not want us to finish the journey. So it tricks us into resisting. It tricks us into finding things to judge. It tricks us into finding things to struggle against. And therefore it keeps us the same. It keeps us the same. Now, a very, very simple explanation or a very, very simple example of this is when we are beginning to meditate. We sit down to meditate, and part of our orientation, at least when I first started to meditate back in the 70s, I had no idea what meditation was. And I thought it was about controlling thought. Controlling thought. I thought we were supposed to sit there and the mind would be completely blank. And boy, was I wrong. So I drove myself crazy. I'd sit there to meditate and a thought would come in my head and I'd say, oh, darn it, there goes a thought. Why am I thinking? Why am I thinking? I'm trying to stop thinking. I'm not going to have any more thoughts. Oh, wait a second, that was a thought. Now I'm thinking about not having thoughts. Oh my God, I'm still thinking. I'm not doing this right. And I would get completely frustrated. And I went through this for a period of months. And it was always the same thing. And I never really got to meditate. And I never really knew what meditation was. And what I came to, the way I came to view it when I finally went back to meditation later in the 90s, I was off for about 20 years because it didn't work. I had labeled it as, I don't know, it doesn't work. And I never went back to it. What I came to realize is the ego resists the meditation. So we sit down and we try to do something simple like count from 1 to 5. Breathe in. Exhale, count 1. Breathe in. Exhale, count 2. Just something simple. Just do that from 1 to 5 over and over without losing count. And the ego resists. And it throws an extraneous thought in there, Did you leave the stove on? It's going to rain. Did you leave the car windows open? I wonder what time the news comes on. You going to miss the news? All these things just kind of come in. They come in and they come in. And we try to resist. See, if we're just beginning, we try to resist. And we say, oh, darn, I'm trying to meditate and now all this noise. Or these fan blades are spinning and I can't get into the meditation. And what we come to realize is not to struggle. Not to resist. Because that which we resist persists. So here's the first practice for learning not to resist is when we sit to learn to meditate, is not to fight as thoughts come up, not to struggle as thoughts come up. Thoughts arise, thoughts appear, thoughts disappear. That's it. That's it. Thoughts appear, thoughts disappear. That's it. That's all there is to it. And then what this does is it starts to carry over to our waking lives. When we hear something on the news, we read something in the paper, or somebody says something to us, we might become entangled with that. It might stir up some sort of an emotion for us. And immediately we become engaged with that emotion. That's just wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. The government's raising our taxes again, or this or that or the other thing. And we get sucked right into that. I've told you that one of the things that I had to become very familiar with in one of my jobs was propaganda and how propaganda works. And these things that you would call fake news now, this is propaganda. This is information that is designed to influence, not to inform. And I saw a piece last week and it said that the way that the fake news works is it starts with outrage. They have to do something or say something that awakens outrage in an individual. And once that individual becomes outraged, logic and reason is gone, and they are very susceptible to whatever ideas the propagandist is trying to put through, gets through to them. Now the manipulators know this, right? They know this. People who use this have become very, very good at it since the beginning of the 20th century. But what would happen if we didn't become engaged? What would happen if we never became outraged? You see. They rely on our sense of judgment, our sense of right, our sense of wrong, and not the sense of isness, of suchness, of I amness. That is the spiritual essence. So the second technique that we want to look at then is just be aware. Just be aware. Don't label it right, don't label it wrong. Just be aware. Now, you are your best tool because you are feeling things all the time. You are thinking things all the time. You are hearing things all the time. You're saying things all the time. Can you first be aware? Just be aware. So in the past, you might have heard something that says, well, that's outrageous. And now you might just say, well, that's interesting. Perhaps. We have the story that comes to us from the East about the man who had a mare that plowed his fields. And the mare ran away. And the neighbors came and said, oh, you poor man, you only had one horse to plow your fields. That horse ran away, and isn't it terrible? And he said, perhaps. Why do you say it's terrible? All that happened was the horse ran away. And 2 days later, the mare comes back, and she brings a whole herd of wild horses with her. And now the neighbors come over, and they say, oh, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? Your horse was gone, and the horse came back, and the horse brought all of these other horses back, and now you're a rich man. You have all of these horses. And he said, why do you say it's a good thing? Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. Just some horses came. That's all that happened. The man's son went out and tried to saddle break one of the wild stallions and got thrown and broke his leg. And the neighbors came and said, oh, what bad luck, what bad luck. Isn't that terrible? Your son broke his leg. And the man says, well, perhaps it is terrible, perhaps it's not terrible. All that happened was my son fell off the horse and broke his leg. That's it, that's all that happened. Well, a warlord came through the village, was going off to make war against another warlord, and the warlord confiscated all the young men of the village of military age, took them into the army, was going to force them to be soldiers, but because this young man had a broken leg, he couldn't go. And all the neighbors go back to the father and say, aren't you lucky your son broke his leg? He didn't have to go off to war with the warlord. And the father says, perhaps. All that happened was he didn't get drafted into the army. We want to adopt that perhaps attitude to avoid getting sucked in, to avoid getting sucked into the drama. How does drama work? We turn on a movie and there's a drama, one of the most popular genres of movies. And the first 10 minutes of the movie, we learn what the normal life of the protagonist is. We learn what their deepest desires are, what they want, Remember the movie with Danny Glover and Mel Gibson. Danny Glover, he just wanted to retire. He had 2 weeks left on a job or whatever, and all he wanted to do was retire. That's what we knew. And then something happens, right, in the movie, and they get sucked into the drama, and for the rest of the movie they're trying to solve problem after problem after problem after problem to hopefully get back to what he wanted, what the hero wanted at the beginning. Now that story arc has been with us for thousands of years. And it's really, if you think about it, it's the arc of all of our stories. We get sucked into the drama. So we want to observe ourselves. We want to become the observer, right? You are not the same person you were when you were 2 years old. You don't have the same body you had when you were 2 years old. That body is gone. You are not the same person you were when you were 2 years old. But you remember being 2 years old because you were the witness. You were the witness of the one who was 2 years old. And we must become that witness. So we sit down to meditate. We sit down to meditate and all of a sudden something comes to us. Oh, I'm uncomfortable. Or, oh, there's a noise. Or, oh, this. Or, oh, that. And instead of saying, oh, man, that's annoying, we just say, oh, look, there goes a thought. There goes a thought. In both Christianity and in Buddhism, there's a similar image. In Christianity, we have Adam and Eve leaving the garden. You might have seen this kind of picture in your illustrated Bible book when you were a kid. Adam and Eve were leaving the garden, and God put 2 guards at the gate, right? Whirling swords, flaming swords. I can't remember all the detail. But there's these 2 guards at the gate that are there in case Adam and Eve try to get back in to the tree of life. The tree of life. In Buddhism, the symbolism is the Buddha is in a cave meditating, and there's these 2 ugly creatures outside guarding the gates, and the Buddha has his hand out, kind of like a crossing guard might put their hand out to stop traffic with the palm facing outward. And the symbolism is the same in both. What is it that's keeping us from getting back into the garden? See? What is it that is keeping us from experiencing the true unity of our life? We left because of thinking. We left because of judging, because of ideas of good and ideas of evil, which are only ideas. And it's moving beyond thinking. It is dropping our ego identity with thought. It is just the suchness and the isness and the I amness of being, you see. So if we resist, we are stuck in that thinking. If we think we have to subdue the ego, we are stuck in that thinking. If we think we have to go out and beat evil down, we are stuck in that thinking. And all we want to do is identify with the one who is witnessing. So the 2 guards at the gate, they represent our desire and our fear. Our desire and our fear. And what are these but thoughts, opinions, ideas? Desires keep us from entering the garden because we chase them. We get stuck to them just as surely as the things that we struggle against, the things that we pursue for our pleasure keep us stuck. And then our fears are where we do not see the oneness, the isness, or the suchness. Like my dog barking at the carpet cleaning attachment. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it wasn't part of him. He knew it wasn't part of him. So we have to learn a whole new way of being. I was on a job one time. I was coaching an executive of a company, and the marketing environment had changed. This was a very big company, and it had many divisions. And each division had a division head, and each one of those had aspirations to someday become the CEO of an organization. So they were very much in competition with each other, right? They were all vying for the next promotion. And competition had been good because it built this business as it was. But now the marketing environment changed, and they had to learn how to cooperate with one another. They had to learn how to get all of their divisions to interact and work with each other and optimize all of the resources for the survival of the company. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They each kept jockeying, trying to figure out how to make their division be the one that was still standing, And we used to tell them, you guys are crazy because, the boat's sinking, but you're happy that your end is still dry. So the president asked myself and my colleague one time, he said, what's going on? And I said, well, they got to the top of the division by being strong competitors. And now they have to learn how to collaborate, and they don't know how to do it. And he said, well, you know what I'll do? I'll make a competition. Whoever's the best collaborator will win. And I just looked at him, I said, did you hear yourself? Did you hear what you said? He said, yeah, I guess that won't work. We can't take the tools that we used in the past to enter back into the garden, because the tools that we're using from the past are the tools that got us put out of the garden. They are the tools that tell us of division and of separation and of right and of wrong and of evil and of struggle and of drama and of resistance. And now we must let go of resistance. So I invite you, if you don't have a meditation practice, start a meditation practice. Very simple. Inhale, exhale 1. Inhale, exhale, say 2. Go from 1 to 5 and do that over and over without losing count. If you lose count, simply go back to 1. Don't struggle, don't resist, darn it. Just do that over and over again. What it does is it teaches you don't have to become entangled with every single thing that comes across your mind. And then during the day when you're not meditating, just be aware. Be aware. Don't be that drama that's taking place in your head. Don't be those ideas that are taking place in your head. Observe those ideas as they take place in your head. Thinking, the intellect, analyzing, problem solving, all of these skills are good skills. Think of all of the great things that we have done in society, of the diseases that we have cured, and all of these things through thinking. But there is a time for non-thinking. There is a time for being. So let's not try to fight our way back into the garden. Let's not try to figure out how we're going to defeat those guards at the gate. Let's not try to build a big army to run at them and take them down. Let's let them dissolve into the nothingness from which they came, because they too are ideas in our imagination. God is all there is. It doesn't create out of need. It doesn't fear anything. It has everything. It is everything. Whatever it wants, it makes. There's no sense of lack. There's no sense of attachment. There is just the isness, just the suchness, just the I amness. From your earliest memories, you have been caught up in your thoughts. Now it is time to get caught up in your being. Take time. Don't struggle. Observe. Be aware. Don't resist. And so it is.